everyone. I'm excited for our fourth and final workshop. Thank you all for being here. It's exciting. It's an exciting moment, but also a sad moment. I hope you all sign up again. We're going to have new speakers. You're going to be matched with a new mentor. We're going to have new content. I think you're going to really enjoy it. But our workshop 4 topic is how to manage conflict in the workplace. This is a very big deal. And I think to maybe ask an early question, just to get the ball rolling on this topic, is when you're in a work environment, the question I have for you is, how do you want others to feel about you? Write in the comment section. I love to learn about it, because what's so critical is the intentionality that we have about how others feel about us. I think so often when we're in a stressful work environment, we think about blaming other people. We think, well, XYZ person wants to sabotage me. They're always trying to undercut me or undermine my work, or they just do these things just to frustrate me. But more often than not, I find that they don't do it on purpose. More often than not, I find that they don't even know that what they're doing is frustrating you. And so what I really want to open up for in terms of this conversation, this question, is how do you want other people to feel about you? Because there might be something that you do that frustrates somebody else. You don't even realize that that's what you're doing, because you maybe haven't set an intentionality. It just was the most convenient for you to do thing for you to do at the time, so you just kept on doing it. You had no idea that this frustrated other people. So write in the comment section, how do you want other people to feel about you at work? Do you want other people to think of you as reliable or dependable or hardworking or kind, friendly, always optimistic, nice, always having a good, positive, upbeat personality? How do you want other people to perceive you? I'd love to learn about that, because ultimately, this is your reputation. This is how other people perceive you. And this is so critical, because I think it's so often, it's so easy to blame others for the things that they do that frustrate us, but it's so easy to be blind to how what we could do might frustrate them. So if we can set an intention for how we want other people to feel about us, if we think about that every single morning when we go into work, our likelihood of actually fulfilling and embodying that persona, that person, increases substantially. So I want to ask the question, how do you want other people to feel about you at work? Now, this is critical, because ultimately this means that you're going to have to remove any other personal baggage to make sure that you're still staying consistent with how you want other people to feel about you. It doesn't matter if you found out your grandma just got diagnosed with cancer, or that your dog just died, or that you're having rough things that are going on in your relationship. Does not matter, because at the end of the day, what matters is, are you able to stay consistent to who you said you wanted to be? And the person that is the most professional, the person that is really bringing it every single time, is the person that can stay the most consistent. Because if you start to let your personal stuff creep into your professional life, it's going to open you up to potentially not being the consistent person, the consistent intentionality that you've set for how you want other people to feel about you. And I think it's really important that you really work towards doing that, which leads to the 3 keys to success that I've shared with you in every workshop, which is your strategy, your story, and your state. And fortunately, we know how to get ourselves into a state conducive for being successful. No matter what is going on in our words, no matter how mad, sad, angry, dejected we're feeling about anything going on, we can get ourselves into an emotional state conducive for being happy, even if it's for a temporary period of time, through our motion. So what I want to do right now is I want you all to stand up, and I want you to shimmy it out. I want you to shake it loose. I want you to scream at the top of your lungs. On the count of 3, scream. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out. Let it loose. Let it go. You've got nothing to lose. Who cares if other people are looking at you? You're probably in your house anyways. With all the coronavirus craziness going on, you're probably in quarantine. This is the time to let loose. Because here's the thing, what we know is that when you are able to do that, you're getting your blood moving, you're getting your blood flowing, your brain, you're releasing endorphins in your mind, you're getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. So by doing that, you are putting yourself you're taking yourself from wherever you were, and you're putting yourself into a much more elevated status. That is how you stay consistent. No matter what you want other people to feel about you, if you can get yourself physically into a state conducive for being successful, other people are going to perceive you as whatever feeling you want to set for yourself. So that's critical. The other key is your story. What is the story you tell yourself for why you will or will not be successful? This is critical. If you tell yourself, well, I can't do that, or this is impossible, or I don't know if I have the abilities to do something like that, you're going to achieve the outcome that you've set for yourself. And that is ultimately going to lead to the outcomes that you put on yourself. So if you tell yourself why you're going to be successful, if you tell yourself why you're going to make it work, you might have a chance of actually going out and achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you can do on a daily basis to get yourself there? So maybe if you think to yourself, how do I want other people to feel about me? Maybe if it's to be kind. What can you do that's really kind on a daily basis to really reinforce that feeling you want other people to feel about you? If you want other people to feel that you are hardworking or confident or reliable, what can you do on a daily basis that will embody, that will reinforce you being kind, hardworking, or confident, or reliable? What are those things that you can do to set yourself up for success? That is your strategy. Those are the things that you can do on a regular basis. Now, the reason why this all relates to conflict management in the workplace is because these intentions about how we want other people to feel about us is critical to what we actually manifest at work. Now, it's so easy to get into a rut. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy for us to blame other people for our problems. But here is a great way. This workshop on conflict management is a great tool for you to leverage to help you overcome a lot of the issues that you've got and that you've essentially had for yourself at work. One of the biggest things that I'm a big believer, I'm a huge proponent of, is this concept called this concept called observation, feeling, need, request. This is the key to nonviolent communication, which you might think, I'm not getting violent in the workplace. That's okay. But what I've observed is that this is one of the best ways to totally diffuse a situation. Whether somebody gives you a snide comment at work that you just didn't appreciate, or somebody made an action that you felt like just didn't respect you, or your time, or your abilities, or that overall just frustrates you. As opposed to getting pissed off, yelling at them, exploding at them, being passive aggressive and talking shit about them behind their back, or anything that does not target the issue head on, any of those actions are not productive. Observation, feeling, need, request is productive and can help you come to a solution. Now, here's how observation, feeling, need, request works. It literally follows the exact formula that I've laid out. Observation. What is the thing that you have observed? Now, the key with observation is that it's got to be undeniable. It happened, but there's no emotion to it. So, for example, the thing that really frustrates you is when John interrupts you at work, and let's say he just interrupted you 3 times in the course of a conversation. You can say, hey, John, I was hoping that we could chat for a minute. John says, yeah, sure, what's going on? You say, hey, so one thing that I observed is that in the course of this conversation, you interrupted me 3 times. Now, you don't say, you were being a jerk, you were being a dick, you interrupted me and really threw me off. Like no feelings tied to it, just you interrupted me 3 times. I started talking about this, and then you cut me off and started talking about that. I started talking about this, you cut me off, started talking about that, and then I started talking about this, and you cut me off and started talking about that. It's the key is that it's undeniable. It happened. It's something that John can say, you know what? You're right, I did interrupt you 3 times. Now, doesn't matter what his excuses were for interrupting you. The next part is the feeling. Now, the feeling is, how do you actually feel about that? You're not here to call out John and call him out for being a jerk. You're here to say, hey, when I am interrupted, I feel belittled. I feel disrespected. And now this is the big part, your need. Now, don't elaborate, by the way, when I say those feelings, don't elaborate on them. Just say, hey, I felt belittled. I feel belittled and disrespected. That's it. Everyone can relate to the feelings of being belittled and disrespected. Now, your need is critical because your need is like a higher level need that you've got, that you believe the world should work like this. In a work environment, the work environment should work this way, and that everybody can agree to that. And so your need is, you know what, hey, my need is that I work in a work environment where I feel like when I'm speaking that I'm being respected and that I'm at least being heard. And now that's critical. If you put that out there, John can probably agree to that. The last part is request. Now, what is a request that you can make to John so then he can start to take action that ultimately it can formulate change? Now, you don't want to make it something that's concrete. You don't want to say, hey, my request is that you never interrupt me again. Unrealistic. Probably not going to happen. John may interrupt you sometime in the future, especially if he's weaning off this because it was a habit. But if your request is, hey, my request is that when I'm speaking, that you're conscious of what I'm saying and that you try your best to refrain from interrupting me when I'm speaking. That's a very fair and valid request. John can probably agree to that because you're not asking for too much. You're just asking for him to be conscious of it. So that is how observation, feeling, need request works. It ultimately just lays out exactly what the thing that happened was, how you felt about it, without calling out John or calling out the other person or talking about how bad of a person they were. Sharing what your need is and your request for how they can implement that for the future. That is critical. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this later on tonight in this workshop with our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is an expert on conflict management in the workplace. I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest has to say. But those are my personal observations about what I've observed to work in observation in terms of conflict management. The last thing that I want to share before we jump into our guest speaker is this importance of teaching somebody else something that you've learned. One of the things that I've observed is that when people go through this workshop, when people go through this program, 20 is the magic number. If you tell 20 or more people about something you learned in this program, by the way, it doesn't necessarily need to be that you taught them a full seminar. It could be that you mentioned to your significant other or a friend, a peer, a colleague, hey, I learned about this thing called observation, feeling, need, request in Ambition and Motion workshop. That could be it. We know that when people tell 20 or more people about something they learned, anything they learned in this program, their likelihood of achieving their professional goals increases exponentially. And the reason why is because teaching something to somebody else reinforces that information in their mind. And so by doing that, by telling 20 or more people, the likelihood that this is going to stick, the likelihood that you are going to apply it in your professional environment, and the likelihood that you're going to achieve the professional goals that you've set for yourself, because that's been such a big focus of this program, increases exponentially. So what I would love for you to do after this workshop is to find somebody that you can teach something that you learned from this workshop this evening. I think that will really help reinforce what you're learning in this program, really help you make the most out of this experience. I'm so excited to dive into our guest speaker this evening. I really hope that, and I really encourage you to participate in the program. You're going to get a new mentor. We're going to have new content. We're going to have new speakers. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This has been a pleasure working with you all, and I look forward to the next steps. Hey everybody, welcome to our workshop this evening. I'm so excited to dive into our topic of how to manage conflict at work. This is a very fascinating topic in this time period that we're in because we got COVID. And so a lot of workplaces are remote, where you might be working from home and you might get a passive aggressive Slack message or a passive aggressive email or passive aggressive text message or messages at times that are inappropriate to be messaging people, like at 10 o'clock on a weekend or something like that. Or just in general, maybe, people were thinking, oh, I'd message them and they get it at 2 in the morning or on Monday, but you're getting it at, Sunday night at 11 p.m. And so this topic is all about how can we manage this conflict? How can we go about better understanding where people are coming from, leveling with people, and really making sure that our feelings, voices, and just overall thoughts are heard, and that we're understanding where other people are coming from, and we can just have a really respectful working environment. Because this whole managing conflict at work has now gone from like passive aggressive things going on in the office or people saying rumors or whatever, gossip, to now actual messages that are even more difficult to pick up because you don't get intonation. But fortunately, we've got a great guest with us here this evening. We've got Rich Nazzaro. Rich is a business executive with a passion for technology, coming up through business consulting, entrepreneurial startups, and product development. He learned firsthand the value of technology as a building block for sustainable business growth. Rich is currently a senior director for Salesforce. Rich, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Rich, let's dive in this topic. I guess maybe before we dive into the topic, I love to dive into you. I love to learn about your career progression, getting into Salesforce where you're at right now. Tell me more about that progression. And by the way, if there are stories or scenarios along the way where maybe you rubbed heads or you had a little bit of beef with people, I love if you could detail what happened in those scenarios and how you handled that.
Well, yes, there's been plenty of those scenarios along the way of my career. Some I'm proud of, some of them I'm not so proud of, but yes, absolutely a learning experience. Yeah, my career took an interesting turn. I spent the first part of my career in banking in Boston. For people who are in the financial services, is the very, hierarchical society where, people just kind of progress as other people leave the company or banks merge, which happened a lot in the 90s. But I had an opportunity to go work for Accenture. And when I joined Accenture, my first project was with a CRM with Salesforce. Now, at the time, Salesforce was a very small company, but it was one of their first global deployments at a financial services company in Chicago. Spent 2 years with them and learning Salesforce. And then my next project with Accenture, as people know in consulting, is once you learn something, you're an expert. So they sent me over to Dell here in Austin, Texas, where I now currently reside. And I led a global deployment of Salesforce for Dell. So that's really how I started my Salesforce journey. It was actually by accident, because I was intended to be in the financial services practice at Accenture, not the CRM practice. But those are the happy mistakes that happen in our career that turn out to be probably the blessing in disguise that we didn't realize at the time. So I spent a couple of years at Accenture in the CRM practice. And then, like I said, I led...
Rich, real quick, I want to ask about that. So was that a product of you just kind of saying yes to all the opportunities coming your way, and it just happened to get you into CRM? Or, because I know you initially intended on getting the financial services, but then all of a sudden you're now in the CRM. Were you just kind of like, if someone's saying, hey, we need someone to do this, and were you just raising your hand to say like, I'll do it? Or how did that go?
Partly just the way consulting runs. So interestingly enough, when I was interviewing for a different bank, at the same time I was interviewing at Accenture, and both the offers came in the same week. And it was actually less money to go work at Accenture than the other offer. The reason I took it was because I saw the opening for the career. I saw that I could expand beyond financial services in a company like Accenture. So I took the role, again, thinking I was going to be part of the financial services practice. But what happens after you go through training, it's a couple of weeks of training, you look for open roles. So Accenture has like an internal job posting. And part of it is, until you get your network and until you're a known commodity, you kind of have to hunt for your roles. And so there was a role that came up for this that was like program lead for like data analyst or something like that. It was, very kind of basic kind of entry level role that had anything to do with CRM. Like I didn't need to know Salesforce in order to do it. So I applied and met the senior leaders on the project, and they said, yep, you're a good fit, and went in. And the way they usually scope these roles is, oh, you're going to be there for 3 weeks or 3 months, whatever they agree to. So I was there for 3 months, and that role transitioned into, well, now we're going to the global deployment. You're a really good program manager. Like, could you just manage the deployment of a couple of countries of the software? So it was very organic the way it happened. But then after a year and a half of being there, at the time, Salesforce started growing like this. So they needed more people in the practice. Hey, you have 2 years under your belt with this software. You're as good as anyone. So, come over here. We need somebody to lead, a 3-month project here at Dell to do, I think it was to connect their customer master to Salesforce. After that 3 months came, they're like, well, now we're going to blow up this we're going to go global. We need somebody to lead the global deployment. And the customer and I had become friendly, and he's like, I want you to do it. Like, I really like you. I trust you. And so then I wound up leading one of the largest deployments of Salesforce at the time. And again, still wasn't totally aware of what the power of Salesforce was at the time, but leaned into it and led the deployment. And then Dell came after me and said, hey, well, now that you've built this all for us, do you want to run it? So that's how I came to join Dell and become a customer of Salesforce versus an implementer of Salesforce. And then spent many years at different customers implementing it. And then eventually, as most things in the world happen, Salesforce had an opening. I was looking for a new role. And so it was kind of a match. So, I always say I've seen the Salesforce relationship from the implementer side, from the customer side, and now as an employee. So I've seen it from like kind of 3 different dimensions, which is very interesting when working with a company or around a company's ecosystem for that many years, and really understanding it to that level.
That's really cool. That's interesting. I'd be curious to know just from your assessment of, because I know a lot of these students or young professionals watching this right now are probably contemplating their work, and a lot of them are probably contemplating, EY or Accenture or Deloitte or
Yeah.
any of these consulting companies. What I'd be curious to know is like, what percentage of the clients that you're serving through these companies end up having a crazy massive just hockey stick growth curve like Salesforce? Is it a low percentage, medium percentage? Like, do any of them end up just like going just straight down the crapper, or do they like, how does this all work?
I mean, I think it's like anything in the industry. Great ideas are great ideas, but execution is where it happens. And one of the things that I've always admired about Accenture and feel like was such a crucial part of my career was, their tagline is high performance delivered. Like you focus on the client and the outcomes, and that's what you're trained to do, right? We're trained to make sure that that client is successful in the project we're being paid to do, obviously. I don't know, I think it depends on your industry. Like, listen, we focus on financial services. 20 years ago, financial services was banking. Now it's, fintech has completely changed it. And you wouldn't think of financial services companies as technology companies, right? But I think the industry over the last 20 years has changed every company into a technology company. I argued with my investment accountant when I wanted to invest in Tesla, and he's like, it's an overrated car company. I'm like, it's not a car company, it's a technology company, right? If you look at where he takes things, it's not about building a car, it's about building the technology that powers that car. And I think that's why they're valued so high. But my accountant was certainly not keen on that investment, or my investment guy. But that's how I talked to him about it. I'm like, it's not Toyota. Toyota is a car company. Tesla, I don't think is a car company. I think it's a technology company masked with a car company. And I think that's the way a lot of companies need to look at today. I mean, the digital revolution is well in play, right? And every company is looking how to scale their business, and technology is the way to do that.
So what I'd be curious to know is, now that we've kind of outlined your path to getting here, which I think is really fascinating, I think that's really cool. Tell me about some times that you maybe bumped heads with some people that you've worked with.
Yeah, I mean, as we were thinking about this topic, I was reflecting on my career from even when I was back in when I worked in Toys R Us when I was 16, and all the different experiences I had. And I think it's interesting because I would say the common theme throughout my career has been I always ask why, and I question people. Partly because I want to know, and it was no disrespect to the person I was questioning, although many times it was seen that way. But I think that in certain companies, there is a hierarchy, and that hierarchy is very well in play, right? I'd say banking was that way. Retail management was that way. I'd say Salesforce is not that way, which is interesting. But in the past, when I've run into conflict, it's usually like, if I can kind of pinpoint a couple of different experiences, it's usually been where people have felt I was questioning their authority or their knowledge of a situation. And it wasn't so much, and maybe it was my approach, so I'll take responsibility potentially that it was me. But I think part of it was people feeling like you were questioning their authority or questioning who they were, and their decision making. And I think that's hard, because I think everybody's a product of their experiences. And so you could have been working somewhere for 30 years, and I could come in with just a different perspective. And sometimes people are intimidated. There's a whole bunch of emotional factors, which we could talk about ad nauseum, as why people react the way they do. But the conflict has usually been where it's been, at least in my experience, many times it's been where people just think that maybe you're trying to do something that's not in alignment with their thinking. And so what I've had to learn over the years is two things. One is, when conflict arises, you can do two things. You can push into the conflict and try to resolve it by being open and having the discussion, or to your introduction, be passive aggressive and kind of, dissolve the relationship to some extent, right? Because you're not seeing eye to eye, so you just kind of agree to disagree and go your separate ways, which arguably in the corporate world is really hard because people are very dependent on one another for success. As we kick off our new fiscal year, our leadership meeting is this week, and one of the themes I'm introducing is connectivity. How can we be more connected? Well, you can't be connected if there's inherent conflict within the parties, especially with leadership or with those people who support leaders. And so when I think about conflict, and I think about the conflicts I've had, I think early in my career, I probably didn't navigate it well. And I probably did the former, which was, yeah, whatever. Okay, I'm not going to talk to you about it. I'm going to take my ball and go home. Whereas as I've matured in my career and my hopefully mentors and managers, I've learned that, one, to address conflict head on, right? Hey, listen, I know you didn't like what I said. I get it. I said, but here's where I'm coming from. And I need to understand where you're coming from because we got to figure this out. And hopefully the person on the other side is mature enough to have that conversation.
I love that you outlined it from both parties of like, here's where I'm coming from, but I need to understand where you're coming from. That's very much like the Stephen Covey seek to understand before being understood type of mentality, because it's so easy to just jump in and be like, get on the bus. We're going in this direction. This is where we're going. And it can be easy to judge ourselves on our intentions and others on our perceptions.
Right. And the interesting thing is one is you don't know, like, in some instances in a hierarchical organization, it's very easy because you probably know that answer is coming from the top and filtering down. In a matrix organization like Accenture, like Salesforce, like a lot of technology companies, it's harder because there are multiple people kind of getting multiple messages, and then those messages are forming new messages. And so miscommunication is a very real thing in a matrixed organization, and inherently creates conflict because your leader, the leaders agree on something, but then those leaders tell their leaders who weren't in the room. So they're like, oh, so this is what you want? And then those leaders go talk to each other and they're like, well, Bob said X, well, Ray said Y, well, Sarah said, Z. And you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Those things all are conflicting information. And so sometimes just that inherent miscommunication as it filters down creates conflict. And some people, again, it comes down to a lot of personalities. Some personalities like, well, I'm going to go solve this problem for my boss and I'm going to be the hero. So they are running off and you're like, hold up, like, you can't do that because now you're stepping on my toes. And, we had to work at this together. Well, yeah, Bob wants this, so I'm going to go do what Bob wants. I don't care what you want. So I think sometimes it's like conflict is inherent to the miscommunication or the misalignment that we create within our workforces, which is harder to overcome sometimes, right?
And I would imagine in a matrix organization, not only is there the miscommunication, but I would imagine also a lot of stagnant conversations, because you've experienced this as a leader perhaps within the organization. You're like, okay, I don't want to step on Ray's toes, so I'm going to wait to like hear back from Ray before I tell my team whether or not we as a group agreed on like XYZ or WYZ.
Right.
Because like the Y and Z we know are there. We all were in agreement on that, but the X, or was it W? I can't remember. And I don't want you to put all these eggs in this basket of one of them versus the other and then have me tell you, oh, hey, stop on that, redo it, do it in this way. Because I don't want to waste your energy or enthusiasm towards this project.
Right.
But then that causes us to wait, because now we're waiting for Ray, who's his own bottleneck, and he's on vacation until next week.
Right. Yeah, bottlenecks. Yeah, absolutely. Bottlenecks create, there's a lot of ways that conflict is created, whether naturally or whether just through, again, bottlenecks, miscommunication, just the nature of how companies run sometimes, right? Strategy versus execution. All those things can sometimes lead to inherent conflict. And, sometimes conflict is healthy, right? Sometimes it's just like, again, misalignment, misunderstanding. You all get in a room and you're like, oh, I completely didn't understand that. We're completely aligned now, right? Sometimes it leads to, yeah, but I'm still doing my own thing. And sometimes it's really unhealthy conflict where you have toxic people in a work environment. I mean, that's a very real thing too, where you have people who are just, you know, lob the bomb in the room and just sit and watch it explode, you know, and see the conflict. I mean, there's definitely all different types of personalities, and you'll see them all as you grow your career, and you'll see them all in the same room. But
how do you maintain empathy through all of this? Because I feel like you look at a scenario like what we're describing, you're like, okay, we're waiting on Ray, he's on vacation. You get that one person who's like, I'm the go-getter, I'm gonna go save the day, I'm gonna go rogue, and I'm gonna text Ray, call Ray, Slack message Ray, I'm gonna message him on vacation until he gets back to me. And Ray is just like, are you freaking kidding me right now? Like, I'm on vacation, like PTO, like, do not bother me. And you've got this eager beaver who's just like, I'm gonna get to Ray. If I have to show up on your vacation, I will. I'm kidding, but like,
no, but it's true. I mean, but I also think that's cultural, right?
Yeah, okay.
I will say that there are some companies that don't respect boundaries. I don't know personally, but I've heard that about Amazon. I've heard people who friends of mine who've worked for Amazon is like, work-life balance just doesn't exist. They don't care. Like, you just get the shit done and work twice as harder the next time. Whereas I'm fortunate to work for a company that's very respectful of that, right? And so I think it's partly something you learn as from your leaders, and as you become a leader, is prioritizing what's important and what's not. I mean, it's just like you're always told as a kid, there's some fights not worth fighting, right? And so in the instance where you have that eager beaver who's going to hunt Ray down, and good on you. You're either going to get, and if you know Ray well enough, you know how that scenario is going to turn out, and you just sit on the sidelines and, you know, sip your coffee and wait for it to happen. Or you try to say, you know what, Bob, I get it's really important to get to Ray. Ray's on vacation. It's not a decision that needs to be made today, whether you believe that or not, right? And you try to reason with people. I think empathy is a really good word, because I think it's that, you know, old saying is like, walk a mile in my shoes, right? I think people don't realize what other people have to accomplish within their role sometimes, and where that inherent sometimes conflict comes from. So I will say, like supporting different leaders have different needs, different approaches to how they solve problems. And so if you support a leader who is, let's just say, really visionary, and so they're big picture thinking, and they're like, hey, like, what if we imagined a world that looked like this? And you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then I'm the type of person who's very practical and operationally driven. So I'm like, okay, but you do realize, like, if we do that, 18 things blow up. And my current boss will be like, yeah, nobody wants to hear about the things that are blow up. They expect you're going to take care of those things. So don't tell me it's going to blow up. Just tell me it's going to work. And then you have people who are very like practical, like, okay, we're going to do step 1, and then we're going to do step 2, and then we're going to do step 3, right? And so the different personalities, like, that can cause conflict, right? Because
but even in that example, it seems like you gel well with the boss, like what you have. But I know, like, just because I've chatted with a lot of our students that are now young professionals or in their career, where they would say, here, boss, say, just get it done. And for them, that is like a palpitation. Like, that is like, oh my gosh, all this is weight on my shoulders. I've got to put in all this time to get this done. And I'm a perfectionist, and I just want to make sure it's right. And it becomes so stressful that either they leave or they just explode, and they don't know how to explode, or it just drops all the balls.
Right.
Like, how do you go about setting expectations when you're like, okay, I get it, your expectations that I get all these things done, and you're like, just get it done, Rich, just figure it out. How do you go about telling a boss or telling a colleague, like, hey, here's what's realistic? Or you go to them and say something along the lines of like, hey, here's what's on my plate. If you want to slot this one in, where does it go on the priority list? Like, does it slot above this thing? Because I can do that, but it pushes everything else down. Like, where do you want it to go? Like, how do you handle the expectation setting component?
I think a lot of those conversations are true. So the first thing, when it comes to your direct boss, absolutely. I mean, part of this is being more organized than the people around you, unfortunately, right? Like, so you can say, like, here's the priorities, help me set those priorities. And I also think that sometimes when we spin as employees, when we're given direction, is because we don't ask the clarifying questions. I know I've been guilty of this. To the example you used is like, hey, Rich, I need these 6 things done, go do them. And you're like, I just got to go do them. And so then you sit there and you're like, but I don't really know what they're asking me to do here. But I don't want to go back and ask them, because then I'll look like an idiot because maybe I don't know. I've learned over the years that that's not true. That most of the time when people ask you to do something, sometimes they don't even know what they're asking you. And the clarifying questions help you both come to a level of understanding. Oh, okay, so you want this? Okay, like I can tell you I can do X, Y, and Z. I can't do A, B, and C because I'm dependent on Garrett, I'm depending on somebody else. So let me give you that first wave of analysis, the first feedback, the draft, whatever it is, and you give me feedback on that while we're working on the next part. So I think chunking out the work into logical steps is very appropriate. And I think people appreciate that. I think especially senior leaders setting expectations around what it is that we can do and what we can't do. I do think that one of the things I've struggled with, which I've got coaching on, which I appreciate that I even get the coaching, because a lot of people will not coach, but I particularly have a boss right now who is very good at that, is just that example. Hey, nobody wants to know the problems. Just figure out the problems, figure out a way around it, work with your peers to do it. Hey guys, we've got the mission to go do this. You and I both know it's inherently flawed. How can we work around that flaw? And then really go back to leadership and say, hey, we can deliver this, but here's what I need from you. I need more money. I need more people. I need more time. I need you to remove roadblocks. Here's the 3 roadblocks I need you to remove, and here's why. I think if you present that back to them that way, they appreciate it, because they realize that you can't do everything. And there also should be an expectation on leaders that their role is to remove the roadblocks for you to be successful as well. So I think there's an expectation for us to invite the leaders into that conversation and say, I've designed it, I've thought about it, I've worked with my peers, I've worked with the subject matter experts, and here's what we've come up with. And you set these 3 goals, but here's why these 2 goals are a little harder to do under our current structure. But if we do X, Y, and Z, we could get around that. But that means we have to change something in the environment. That's where I need you to do that.
So I want to dive into this for a second, because this is a really fascinating point that you're bringing up, Rich. Well, first, I want to ask the students in the audience watching this right now, what are some of the biggest or more challenging work challenges that you face? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. But Rich, what you're identifying and what if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that oftentimes executive leadership is unaware of the challenges that you are facing. But sometimes it can be easy to fall into our own mind as to how can our boss not know that we're facing this situation? How can they not know that we're facing this robot? They're just purposefully loading it up on me and not empathizing with my scenario without acknowledging or realizing that I, myself have not communicated with my boss that these are the challenges that I'm facing right now. And these are the roadblocks that I'm facing. And if that conversation hasn't happened, if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is there's no way for your boss to actually know. And you've got to be communicative as to the roadblocks that you're facing, or else you really can't expect anything to change.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have had the conversations with my boss where I was venting and he was like, well, what are we going to do to solve it? What are we going to do to solve it? And we just couldn't see eye to eye. And I remember after the call, I sent him a message and I said, I get what you're expecting from me, but sometimes there are things that I need to communicate to you in order to meet your expectations. And so sometimes I need to get things out of my brain to organize it, right? And he said, oh, I got it. I was looking for the action to help you. You were looking for me to understand the information you were giving me so I could help make a better decision, right?
That's really good self-awareness on your boss too. Like that's a very mature response. Like a lot, and I know that it sounds that's very wise, because a lot of leaders, and I'm even talking about in some seriously big, seriously executive companies, are not that self-aware or introspective to hear that and know exactly what you mean by that. And it can be frustrating when you're dealing with someone who doesn't fully understand that.
I think leadership is a really undervalued trait. And I think that the word empathy is really important, that you've used a couple of times in this conversation. I am so fortunate to have the leader and be able to learn from somebody like that as well, around what that honest conversation looks like. And, you know, my boss is a very senior person in the organization. He's been doing this many years. And I tell him all the time, I called him a unicorn. I said, not to your point, not all bosses would be open or receptive to that conversation. I don't want to say it's unique to Salesforce, but it is definitely a cultural thing that people respect and listen to one another. Doesn't always happen to the point of this conversation around conflict. It does sometimes create conflict, but I think when you can work from a leader and learn from a leader who leads with empathy, but leads by listening and not by doing. In this situation, he definitely was looking for cues and actions. But once we've established that, next time I said, hey, I just want you to listen, throw a whole bunch of stuff on you. I need you to help me sort through this, because I know what you want, but I'm battling with a couple of things that I don't think I can accomplish. And I need that coaching, or I need that support. I think if you can establish that trust with a leader and that relationship, it's really powerful. And I think leaders in organizations have a responsibility to their employees to help them navigate that too, to help them understand what that looks like. Because, there are some people who naturally are born leaders. We all have seen them, who you're just like, how did they progress so quickly in their career? How do they just know what the right thing to say is? And some people have great instincts, and they have great ability to just move the ball down the line, what seems to be effortless to all the rest of us. Some of us have a harder road with that. I definitely struggle sometimes with that.
I will say though, I think most people, I mean, you don't just wake up one day as the Michael Jordan of leadership. I think there's a lot of practice that goes into it, and just maybe we don't see the practice hours of just seeing coaching opportunities, knowing that this is a coaching opportunity, recognizing it, and then going ahead and coaching somebody else. I think that's something that's not inherently intuitive to all people. Like, have you seen like the show Ted Lasso?
I haven't watched it yet. I've heard, but
it's a good show. I think you would love it. It's premise, American football college coach gets hired in England to coach football. And he knows nothing about soccer. He doesn't know how the rules work, but he's an incredible people leader. And he's just it's a great story about that. But
I think when you grow in your career, becoming a people leader is something that companies don't spend enough time doing. They don't spend enough time coaching or giving people training on what it looks like to be a leader. And because there's different aspects to leadership. There's managing up, there's managing across with your peers, but there's also coaching, right? As a people leader, I take that role super seriously. One is like to the point of this conversation is resolving conflict. When I have people come to me and say, well, this so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. The first thing, to your point, is lead with empathy. Okay, so what was going on for them, right? I had an employee who particularly had a couple of personal things that have happened over the last couple of months, and people like, oh, well, they're not very responsive. I said, great. I said, you know what? Let me just not share in details, but there's a lot of stuff going on personally for them. So maybe they're struggling a little bit with their job right now. Just ask you to like we'll figure it out, but like be a little kinder, right? Like just kind of chill out a bit. There could be instances where, again, there's conflict and you say, okay, so what's going on with them? What do you think the issue is there? Well, I just don't think they understand what we're doing. Okay, how did you explain that to them? Maybe we need a different presentation. Maybe we need to provide more details. Their job is to look at the world this way. Your job is to look at it this way. Are you talking their language or our language? and sometimes interpreting that language. So I think part of being a leader is also being a coach and helping them. But like, I can't be a good coach if sometimes I'm not getting good coaching, right? Or to your point, seeking it out myself. Through entities like yourself or otherwise. Like, how do we share our experiences? How do we learn from one another? I think there's a lot more to be said about that. And I think as you grow your career, it's very easy to become focused on your career. I particularly spent this weekend starting to read a new book, and I spent reading the book, between my book and my iPhone, taking notes. Oh, this is a really good point. Oh, I could apply that. So I think it's like when we stop investing in ourselves, and no matter what that looks like, I think that's when things like conflict occurs, because you're not opening your mind to the possibilities.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think even the action of it, I think there was like a study done on this where it was like, if you, it's so hard to describe, but if you come to somebody and say, hey, Rich, I know you're a super kind person and all these sorts of things. Anyways, I've got this nonprofit and I was wondering if you'd be open to volunteering for this sort of thing. Like, if I presuppose a character trait that's admirable to somebody, the likelihood that they're going to act in accordance with that trait that I just presupposed onto them is very high. And so this idea of saying, okay, I'm going to consistently invest in my growth and my development and my ability to improve. I am essentially consistently putting this notion that I'm a coach, I'm a leader, I'm a person who really invests in myself. I'm reinforcing that in my mind. So I'm going to try to act in accordance with that identity that I've created for myself for future interactions.
And I think for all of us, it's like, I will say, growing your career and balancing everything as you get older gets harder. I mean, you know, I became a father 5 years ago. It changed exactly everything. And I thought I could still do all the same things. As your kids get older, you start to realize like, oh, like I can't work 50 hours a week, still be a good dad, still be a good husband, and do all these things. And so then the things like, okay, well, I stopped reading books for myself because I no longer had the time. But then you start realizing is like, well, where's the balance? Like, so Saturday morning, take an hour and you dedicate it to yourself. Now, listen, this has taken me years and years to figure this out, but now that I'm a genius at it, I'll impart my wisdom. You know, I mean, I think there's this balance of what your priorities are. And I think for Americans, what's what I love about the Europeans, Americans like center themselves around their career. And especially when you start moving up in your career, and if you feel like, you know, a sense of competitiveness to get ahead, then you focus on what you want to focus on. And I think that, you know, I will say, as you grow your career, some people just focus on the top. Oh, I'm going to get to the next level. I'm going to get to the next level. I think some of those leaders who advance very quickly sometimes miss the learnings that come with the conflict, that comes with the struggle, that comes with the, you know, really leaning into the role they're in today, whether that's like focusing on employees and coaching and growing that, whether it's focusing on yourself and, you know, accelerating your learning. Sometimes you can become very insulated in the world you create for yourself. And I will say that the more I step back from that, and just take time to do a workout, take time to shut off the computer at 5 o'clock and go sit with the kids, or, you know, read a book or whatever it is, your relationship changes. And then I think you're better prepared to handle conflict. Like, to go back to the topic we're talking about, is because you've kind of created that headspace for yourself to think through, well, is this a priority? Is this a problem? Like, sometimes when you go from fire to fire, or the next thing to the next thing, then when conflict arises, you're ready to just like, I'm going to resolve this conflict because I got to go move on to the next thing. You're just now creating a roadblock for me. And so sometimes the headspace isn't there to deal with the conflict, because you're like, I know I'm guilty of it. Here's my list. I got to get through this list, guys. Hell or high water, I'm getting through this. And sometimes it takes, to your point is, well, Ray's on vacation, so it's not going to happen this week. So put it on the list for next week and take the time and go do something else.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, Rich, this has been a really great recording. This has been a really great workshop. I know a lot of our students are on LinkedIn. Are you okay with them connecting with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. Just let them know it was through this. So I know, because you get a lot of unsolicited things in LinkedIn. And so I'm very cautious about accepting randos, because then you get the, hey, like based on your LinkedIn profile, I'd love to sell you this. You're like, yeah, no, I don't want to be sold something. But yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share experiences and get to know people better. And, you know, there's organic connections that can be created. So absolutely.
Very cool. Well, Rich, thanks for being here. Students, thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. See everybody.